indeed so glad and I'm happy to have you here. Believe me when I say I am happy to have you here. Welcome back, my subscribers. And if you're new to my page, please, I beg you, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for more updates. So today on our history class, we'll be talking about sources of history. Sources of history, there's so many materials about the sources of history and everything, but getting clarity, because I remember trying to harness some materials for my classes and I didn't see one that would be easy for my students to understand. So today I'll be making a very, very simplified video on sources of history. When we say sources of history, what does sources of history mean? Sources of history can be defined or seen as those working documents, materials, or informations that are gotten and a historian uses it to corroborate or reconstruct history. So any working document or material that is available for use in the reconstruction of history is called a source of history. That means even if it's a word of mouth or gotten from people through images or something, it can be referred to as a source of history. Now, how is history presented, or how can the sources be presented? It could be presented orally, or it could be presented in written or documented form. So when you are asked how are the sources of history presented, you could say either in written or oral forms. Now let's look at the sources of history. Primarily, we have three major sources of history, and this is seen this way, especially in the elementary and the secondary school level. We have the primary sources, or we have the secondary sources as a second source of history, and the third source of history is regarded as a tertiary source of history. Now I'm going to take each of these accordingly. If we want to look at the importance, why is it necessary for a historian to make research or work with sources of history? I will tell you why. Sources of history serve as informations that you could use to put together to get your facts. Remember that history is factual. It's not a made-up story or a fairy tale. History is actually a knowledge that has facts. Therefore, it is not an imaginative kind of work, but rather something that has really happened and now it is now being put together. It's like a reoccurring event. So the sources of history are very important in the reconstruction of history because they provide evidence as to what is being said. It serves as a means to delve in and also study, to have good, tangible materials at hand. Now that we've found out why it is important to study the sources or to gather the sources of history together, we'll have to analyze the sources of history one after the other. Remember, I said we have three major sources of history. One, the primary source. Two, secondary source. And the third one is the tertiary source of history. What is a primary source of history? As the name implies, primary sources of history are those original sources of history, those ones that come in its original state through word of mouth, through having an eyewitness account. Those are primary sources of history. Now, in the distant past, or rather I would say in the pre-literate societies, these primary sources of history were one of those ones that were common. So these sources of history, or rather the primary source of history, is presented in its original form. I would rather say it is not adulterated. And this source of history, the primary source of history, is further broken down into three. We have the oral sources, we have artifacts, and we have archival materials. So for this phase of the video, I will be walking you through the primary source of history. Now, when we look at the oral sources of history, oral sources, as the name implies, is words spoken, things that are said. Oral sources of history could involve or include the oral traditions and the oral evidences. Oral traditions are more of spoken words, proverbs, words of mouth, things that have been transmitted, especially from one generation to the other. That is the oral traditions. And that is why in the distant past, you had people who were custodians of history. They had ideas because they were there, they witnessed it, or they got the first-hand information from someone who had witnessed it. I know that in the early or ancient Egyptian time, we had those special people that were called the scribes. So they were just majorly in charge of things that concern series of events and tales. So this oral traditions could involve epigrams. You have folklores. You have proverbs that are being transmitted, and then they are told by these possessors of the information because they have great value. Now we have another part under the oral sources that is called the oral evidence. A good example of this oral evidence is one that we would see where a narration or a tale of events is being told by someone who actually witnessed it. But because of the advancement in technology and other things, these words are now recorded or documented so that it could serve as reference materials. The Nigerian Civil War that was in 1967 to 1970 is a very good example of an oral evidence. This is because eyewitness or participants of that event were able to tell their tale and it was now recorded. That is why we have more of it in pictorial forms, you have it in written forms, and then there are a few of them that have had the opportunity to give a video account of this. And these are oral evidences because they are tangible materials. You can still refer to them, you can touch them, you can see them. So unlike the oral traditions, those ones you can only see the possessors of it, but you cannot really see those evidence per se. You can't see their words, but you can only hear. So they could be regarded as a non-tangible evidences. Now we're done with the oral sources. We're going to be looking at artifacts. What are artifacts? Artifacts in general are man-made evidences that were gotten through the course of archaeological excavation and findings. So artifacts are those things you could see that belongs to the distinct or distant past. Probably what they used. It could be their structures, it could be utensils and other things. Now, artifacts are further broken down into two. One is the relic, the other is a monument. Relics are those items that can be moved. You could take them from one place to another. A good example could be seen with their working implements of the people who lived in the past, the kind of utensils, their artwork, their clothing, and other things. Those are movable things gotten from the past. How about monuments? As the name implies, monuments are those things that are structured. They are immovable. You can't take them, except maybe you go through the process, although through advanced technology now, you can move some structures or houses. But what we know that monuments are those immovable things. A good example is of monuments could be caves. You can't take a cave away from a particular location. You can't take rocks. You can't take mountains. You can't take tombs away from where they are. You can't take wells away. And that is why in the present day, what happens is to reserve or preserve those sites, these things are now, you have a building or a structure to cover it. and then it could just be repaired. But those are immovable things. Now that we have been able to look at the oral sources, we've looked at artifacts. Before I go further to talk about archival materials, I would still want to tell you to please subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and then don't forget to hit the bell icon to always get updates when I upload a new video. And if you enjoy the video, please don't forget to share and like the video. We could engage in this conversations. You could ask me things you want me to post, and then I would make more materials for us to work with. So now, for the primary source, I'll be looking at the last one, which is the archival materials. When you hear of archival materials, the first thing that comes to your mind is, where is an archival material found? Yeah? Archival materials are those materials that are found in a place called an archive. Yeah, what is an archive? An archive is a particular place or a location that is made to keep important documents or handy documents. Now, archival materials are found in archives. So when you look at an archival material, you know that this is something that has been preserved because of its importance, or rather relevance. So things you can find or include as archival materials could be photographs. You could have maps. You could have scrolls. You could have pictures. We also have videos. We have interview messages. And archival materials is not just restricted to history alone. Even in different agencies. I'll give an example of the police units, the military. They all have archival materials. In organizations, you find archival materials. This is because every organization has that personal place where they store their data and information. Yes, we know everything has gone global and digital. We now save some of these things on backup systems, on hard drives and everything. It could be regarded as an archive, but you can't find an archive laying everywhere. It has to be searched for. So archival materials are found in places called the archive. Now, when we want to group the archive, in an archive, you can either find classified or declassified materials. Now, when materials are said to be classified, it means that they are still very secretive materials that are not meant to be let out to the general public. So when you have those kind of material, it only falls into the hands of the appropriate people that need to use it. What about the declassified ones? They are the materials that have now been regarded as open to people. A good example of such materials are police reports or during an investigation. If there's a crime that has taken place somewhere and the people are trying to find out, you want to unravel the situation. In 10 years to come, you would always find these materials in the safe place. I know if you've rather watched criminal investigative channels and everything, you find out that any evidence that has been gotten from a crime scene, it is carefully packed, sealed, and kept probably in a box, and it is labeled with that crime name or the name of the person involved. And it will be kept safe because there's a need to check and get evidence out of it. So by the time everything is unraveled and it has been solved, those items can be regarded as declassified materials. Anybody can access them, and if it's something that is not perishable, it will be left for a very long time. So I have been able to talk about the primary sources, where I told you that primary sources could be presented orally or in written form or documented form. Now, we looked at the types of primary sources, where I said we have the oral sources, we have artifacts, and we have archival materials. So when you are asked or you come in contact with primary sources, always think about these items or this material. So thank you for staying tuned to my channel, I enjoy having you here, and I hope to see you next. In my next video, I'll be making a video on the secondary source of history. Hope to see you there. Bye.